Hey.
Great idea. Just start it now so it's ready to have it.
Yeah, exactly. But that way, that's all you can do. Record everything.
I figured out how to upload all the missing data last time. Finally.
Here we go. Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Edible Education 101. This is our 8th class meeting of the 2018 course. Pleasure to have you all with us again tonight. To start the class, we have a special announcement from Nuria about the Global Social Venture Competition.
I have a one-day conference, which is called The Future of Social Ventures. And in the morning, we're going to have 2 workshops. One is on design thinking, led by OpenIDEO, and another one on impact investing, led by Omidar. We will also have 2 keynote speakers, and we will learn their journeys. It's Leila Jenna, she's the founder of Samasource, and Carlos Orellana, the founder of Sala Uno. And then in the afternoon, we'll also hear the pitch from the top 6 US teams that will try to get a spot to compete for the final of global social competition in Milan, in Italy. So if you have any other information, just visit gsvc.org, and I'll leave some flyers in here.
Thank you, Nuria. It's a really worthwhile event that started 20 years ago here at Haas, and it's spawned and supported a lot of really notable social ventures and entrepreneurs through the years. So if you can get involved, it's a great program. And if you're on a team and you win, you get to go to Milan. Not bad. We have a very special guest with us tonight, Paul Hawken, who is the executive director of the drawdown.org project, among other things, and I'm going to introduce him in a few minutes, but it's a great honor to have you with us today, Paul. You remember last week we got a full tour of Full Belly Farms and Sierra Orchards. How many people enjoyed those walnuts and are still involved? Yeah, that was very generous of Craig to bring us all those walnuts. That got me thinking a lot about this connection we have with the farmers and the role that they are playing in really sustaining our well-being and how much they depend on us to sustain theirs. And it really brought to light this food system. And I'm going to just share a little bit of this for you, Paul, really, so you can kind of see what the class is about. We're trying to help understand the food system. And this is kind of a linear diagram of the system of supply. But we've also been looking at the system of human health and the system of environmental health in context too. And I've been trying for years and years in my own career to model this, to sort of tell this story of the integration and the interdependence of human health and planetary health. And this was a graphic that I came up with about 10 years ago that sort of took the drawing from a Tibetan medical text with the chakras and superimposed it on the planet. This was the diagram that I created to illustrate the thesis for a venture capital firm, the first one ever to invest in health and sustainable living in a single venture capital firm. So I'm still struggling, as you can tell by the way the lectures are kind of organized and the topics are organized and even the research is organized. It's still fairly siloed. And so in the class, we're really trying to bring about a systems view of things. And I think if I took away one thing over the last couple weeks, this is the importance of the soil, and that soil needs support and tending as well as the vegetables and the fruits. The soil needs as much attention and care as the food we're eating. I also saw just this week, I don't know if you follow Chef Dan Barber on Instagram, but he had a really cool post yesterday of what a chicory leaf and root looks like, and a wonderful story about it. And then I also found this week, I brought the pack with me, but I found the that honey nut squash that he showed us, the seeds are available in the store. So if you're interested in planting any of those seeds, see me before the semester's over, and maybe we can get those going as well. Be kind of fun. They're supposed to be very vigorous, and they grow right up a vine, and they produce many fruits. This is a little hard to see, but another thing that we read earlier in the semester, Paul, was Donella Meadows' Dancing with Systems. And I was thinking about kind of, if you look at the speakers we've had, they almost match up beautifully with Danella's list. You know, Alice and Eric Schlosser really helped us get the beat at the beginning of the course, and also to listen to the wisdom of the system. I think Saru and Claire Brown with Buddhist economics really brought us, you know, some insight into exposing our mental models, staying humble, being a learner, and really honoring and protecting information. And David Katz and others really talked about locating responsibility in the system and making feedback policies for feedback. And you know, tonight, I think we're going to really go much deeper into going for the good of the whole, the common, really the common responsibility we have for the commons. We're going to definitely have to stretch and think about the time horizons that we're making decisions in. We're going to have to expand this boundary of caring. We're going to have to care for not only ourselves and our communities, our friends, our relatives, but we're going to have to care for the community of planet Earth and humankind. And certainly you're going to learn a lot more about complexity tonight. And of course, Danella's famous last words is to hold fast to goodness. So one of the things I heard a lot about last week too was this reciprocity on the farm between the multi-generational relationships that we're developing. And one of the things that I found really striking, we talked about reciprocity earlier in the semester, but in Paul's book, Drawdown, there's a really nice essay by Janine Benyus. And she talks about that as human beings, we've been hyper-focused on competition. And she talks about grasses and trees and in forests competing for resources. But she says that we underappreciate the cooperation and even the role of the chaperone in stewarding complex ecosystems toward vitality and sustainability. And it made me think about where we as human beings are in a state of reciprocity with our food system. And I'm hoping that Paul will elaborate on that further. Before we go any further, we're going to do the attendance really quickly. Because you did your reading last week, and thank you to all of you that gave us some good, positive, and critical feedback on the midterm evaluation last week. And good for you, all of you that have already turned in your paper that's just due in 5.5 hours, right? Everybody got it in already? Good. Those of you that aren't here are still working on it. So this week's question is simple, but we're kind of interested to get a poll. Are you registered to vote, yes or no? Good. That's pretty good. And the next question is, will you vote in the November election when we'll be voting for our governor? It's good. You know, the New York Times said this week that student turnout on campuses is disappointingly low, and they actually identified a whole bunch of districts where if just a modest amount of the college-age population would have voted, that the outcomes in different districts would have been entirely different. And we're talking about like 3,000 votes, 5,000 votes. So you remember hearing a bit about the Farm Bill last week and the people that shaped that Farm Bill. Your vote really counts. Also in the New York Times today, I'm sure you saw, did you see this one? This article? More of the Bay Area could be underwater in 2100 than previously expected. So this is what's starting to come out now. The scientists have been telling us, and we've been getting kind of rosy forecasts, but check this map out that comes along with it. This is basically San Francisco International and Oakland International Airport underwater in 80 years. So underwater. So think about what kind of planning or remediation is going to have to take place. This is today. This is in the paper today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you someone very important to me. I'll just remind Paul. Paul was a very important mentor to me very early in my career when I had this wild idea to get this tea company started. He was very generous, and he said, I know somebody that knows a lot about tea. And it was, I think it was a board member of yours or an investor of yours, David Bacon. And Paul said, here's his number, go to London and meet him. And that trip sort of changed my life. And it just always, I think the gift of that generosity that you gave to me infused me with the commitment to mentorship that I have. I feel like that, you didn't have to do that. I think you even let me sleep in your house for the week too, so while I was getting this going. So he was very generous. And for those of you that don't know, Paul also wrote a book that was incredibly important and valuable to a whole generation of entrepreneurs called Growing a Business. And for those of us that like to grow things, it was kind of a seminal vision of how an entrepreneur could be responsible to a greater constituency than making just a profit in the world. And Paul's gone on to do many things. You know, I noticed today on LinkedIn, some people describe themselves as visionaries in their titles, which I always wonder about. But Paul truly is a visionary. And he's generally 10, 15, 20, 25 years ahead of his time, and he's generally right. And he wrote a very important book, co-wrote a book called Natural Capitalism, which really opened the whole conversation around triple bottom line, management, accounting, and just the way to change the way we think about the resources that are available to us. So it's a great honor to have Paul with us tonight. Paul Hawken, welcome to Edible Education 101.
Such a flash from the past. When I drove up LeConte, I lived on LeConte when I went to LeConte School here. I'm a Berkeley brat. My father taught here, and I grew up in the library. And in my family, Marion, there was no Google, Marion the librarian was a hero or heroine in our family. And when I would go from grammar school, I'd go right to the Bancroft or Rare Books or one of the libraries, go up into the stacks and just hang out and pull out books just randomly and read them. So being here is actually a real honor. Thank you, Will, and thanks for all you do. And I'm here in front of somebody I've always just adored, which is Alice Waters. And if you haven't seen her, she's right here. She is just an amazing, astonishing woman. And also with John Love, with whom I've worked with for years at Pachamama Alliance. And you're his niece? Oh, wow. Anna's his niece. Okay. Well, really. Anyway, thank you for being here. Is this coming off? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Try to keep it on. Drawdown, I want to talk about climate in a different way than you've ever heard it. And drawdown, just so you have a sort of working definition, drawdown refers to that first time on a year-to-year basis where greenhouse gases peak and go down. And the reason it's important to me is I felt in the decades I've been watching the climate, I call it the climate establishment, talk about climate. The goals have always seemed very weak and anemic, you know, like mitigation. You hear that word all the time, we should mitigate. Somebody want to tell me what mitigate means? Huh? It means to reduce the pain of something. I'm saying, why would the hell would we want to reduce the pain of global warming? You know, I mean, so the language has been odd. I want to name the goal, and the goal should be to reverse it. If we're going the wrong way, slowing down, you're still going the wrong way, and we've been going the wrong way. So that's what drawdown's about. Most people get information about the climate in a very different way than you do. This is how they get it. They get it in headlines, can be on TV as well, can be a newspaper, can be on the internet, that are basically about fear. They're about threat, they're about doom. They're about basically going right after your adrenals and your cortisol levels. And they're designed that way. And on the internet, they're designed very cleverly, because next to that is clickbait about a woman who kills her husband with a frog ornament and mummifies him for 18 years, you know. And the headline drives you to the clickbait. It's actually, they know what they're doing, and the clickbait is about selling you something. And this is another one, you know, 20 things you never knew you could do with Coca-Cola, and they're doing the right thing, of course, pouring it down the toilet. But I mean, but the headlines are actually based on good science. I mean, the science is correct. This is a Peter Bates study. God, how long the slides are here. They're very drawn out. Okay. If you then are affected by these headlines, and if you Google the top things I can do or we can do or as individuals about global warming, this is the top 2 hits you'll get on Google, or the top 10, top 50 solutions, whatever you do, this is what you're going to get, 2 science-based organizations. And so you look at this list, and you know, the left one is like Proverbs. Really, it should say love your mother too, right? I mean, and then the right one, you have to first get your home entertainment center in order to get a power strip in it, right? I mean, unless you have an IQ lower than room temperature, you look at this list and going, hey, this isn't going to do it, right? And so what do you feel then? You feel disempowered. You feel like, I hope they, whoever they is, get it right, because obviously I can do all this, and this is not going to seal the deal at all. And so you have a disengagement. People go numb, and they say, well, it's not much I can do, you know? And so this is, actually has sound. I don't know how to, there he is. This is Greenland in the summer. You can turn the sound on louder if you want. It's supposed to be harsh, because that's exactly how it sounds. And this is here, this is 2009, and this is in the northern part of Greenland, 250 miles from the closest human artifact. I'm talking about a candy bar wrapper. And scientists from 14 countries go there for 90 days a year, because past that, before that, it's too dangerous, you can't get in, and you'll die. And they work in this ice cave, and what they do, and we don't have to watch this whole video, is this. They drill down 2 miles to bedrock, to the ice core in Greenland. Why? To study what happened in the last 125,000 years. It's called the North Eemian Ice Research Station. They study the Eemian period that happened 125,000 years ago. And when they take the metal jacket off the ice cores, they can run these sort of certain kind of anode cathode calipers, but they go over it. And they can tell exactly the sulfate levels, the CO2 levels, the pollen levels at any given year. And they benchmark that data with ice cores in the Antarctic and also some in the sea. And they get a very good sense of what happened. This is the last 400,000 years. And that dotted line is to represent 300 ppm, 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Our genus Homo has never, for 2 million years we've been here, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Homo sapien, we've never lived on the planet over 300 ppm for the last 2 million years until 1939. And that's the first time it went over 300 ppm. Today, the current level is considered to be 408, 409, 410. What you see in that circle is the Eemian period that was being studied in Greenland. And what we do know about that time is that the temperature on Earth was 1 to 2 C higher than pre-industrial levels. We're 1 C higher right now, so it was comparable to today. The oceans were 20 to 30 feet higher. There were lion and giraffes romping over Denmark and Germany. Hippopotami were breeding in the Thames River Delta. Kent and Sussex were wetlands. And crocodiles were going up the British Columbia coast to breed in Alaska. So that's 1 to 2 C, right? And a very different regime. But this actually is where we are. We're at 490 ppm, not 408. And this is because When you hear that number, it does not count or include the other important greenhouse gases like nitrous oxide, like methane, right? Like HFCs. And when you include those, we're now at 490 ppm. The Paris Agreement and COP21 talks about not going past 450 ppm in 2050. I don't get it. This is science. This is from science, 490 ppm, not me. We're way past 450. And the point about this is we're in terra nova, terra incognita. We don't know where we are because there's a huge buffer lag time between the weather and climate, how it changes, and the rise in greenhouse gases. So again, I just want to emphasize the idea that we should mitigate. When you look at this, you see mitigation here anywhere? I mean, I don't see it. The only thing that makes sense when you're going down the wrong road too fast is to stop and turn around. And that's what drawdown's about. So I wanted to know, and then it was a we, where do we stand? And I would ask each of you, and I would love to hear actually, if we had the time, where do you think we stand? Is it game over? Is it too late? Do we have the capability of arresting and reversing global warming? I mean, people have opinions about this for sure, but how do you feel? You know, I mean, just honestly, how do you feel? Do you do what I do, by the way, and most people do, which is, at least did, which is like, I can't think about that right now. I've got a paper to turn in. I've got this, I got a mortgage, I got children, I mean, that's what most of us do. But when you stop and think about it, where do we stand? And I wanted to know where we stood. And I wanted to know for years, and I asked people to do a study on what were the most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And everybody said, we don't, I went to NGOs and institutions, said, we don't know how to do that, why don't you do it? And I said, I don't know how to do it either. And it was in 2013, and Bill McKibben wrote a piece called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, and it was in Rolling Stone. And that was based on Mark Campanelli's work at Carbon Tracker in London. And Mark was a financial analyst, and what he did is he took the balance sheets of every coal, gas, and oil company in the world that's available and looked at their assets, which is the coal, gas, and oil in the ground. And that's when the term came up of unburnable carbon. In other words, he said, how could these be assets? Because if we burn them, we're Venus, so we wouldn't even be here to burn them. And what Bill McKibben did in his piece is he burned it. And people came to me, this was 2013, and said, game over. I remember it so well. And different people who didn't know each other used the same term. It's game over. I worked hard, I'm an activist, I tried. I'm going to the Squamish Valley in British Columbia, raise my kids, and I'm out of here. And that's when I decided to create Project Drawdown, which is to map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And then these solutions had to be scaling. I call them W.W. Granger solutions. We know how to do them. They're practical, at hand. There's peer-reviewed science. There's economic data. No question about it. They exist. Not like shoulds or coulds or if-onlys. These are things we're doing right now, and we know how to do them. And they're scaling, and if they continue to scale over 30 years, could we achieve drawdown? That was the question that we set out to answer. The problem is we had no money. And I went to foundations. They said, well, show us, when you're done, show us the data. Maybe we'll fund you. And so I turned to you. You say, what do you mean you? We turned to the best environmental departments in the best institutions in the world for these people. And we put out a call for Drawdown Research Fellows. And we were overwhelmed by applications of people who wanted to work with us. And there are Rhodes Scholars, Fulbright Scholars, White House Fellows, Aga Khan Award winners, just the most astonishing people. And 22 countries, 6 continents, and they are the core researchers of drawdown. So this is, and basically they wrote a master's thesis on each solution. We had them cross-reference each other. So if somebody did one, we had a new fellow come in and do the same solution, and so forth. And then on top of that, we added 120 outside advisors, botanists and biologists and engineers and architects and politicians, actors, writers, business people, even Tom Brady, quarterback of the Patriots, is an advisor because his wife is an advisor, Gisele Bundchen, so he wanted to be one too. But it's a very diverse, we have IPCC lead authors like Chris Pike and Dan Cameron and Karen O'Brien to review the content. And to that we added 40 outside expert scientific advisors to really check our models. We wanted to, modeling is not easy to model things. And what we do, and all we did, was math. None of the data you're going to see or that's in the book is our math, none. And so when you look at something like this, you see a rank. That rank is what would happen over 30 years if this continued to scale, right, in terms of avoided emissions. And there's only two things you can do about the atmosphere: stop putting greenhouse gases up there, and bring them back home. That's it. No other possibility. And so that rank is based on how many gigatons, billion metric tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent, in the case of methane or other gases, would be, in this case, avoided. You say, avoided how? Well, that goes to this figure. It says cost is minus 155 billion. How could something not cost at all? And what we did is we had a reference case, and the reference case is business as usual. In other words, what we're doing. We're growing, the economies are growing, there's more people, they want more. So there's a business as usual reference case created by the World Bank and the IPCC and the IEA. And so we measured against that. You have to measure something against something, otherwise what are you measuring? And so that was our case. In this case, where you have geothermal, where it's applicable, that is where it makes sense to put it in, we measured against combined cycle gas or coal-fired electrical plant. And the fact is that geothermal is cheaper. So it's a minus 155 billion. And then the net operating, the net savings is 1.02 trillion over 30 years, again, compared to a coal-fired plant or combined cycle gas. So what I want to show you is just some of the, to give you a sense of the diversity of solutions, because, I mean, what we often hear is, for example, with Al Gore and other people, is that what we need is, solar and wind and Elon Musk, and if we get those things right, we have a hall pass to the 22nd century, don't worry, they're on it. And those are crucial solutions, but those are also scientific howlers. Those three could be done 100% and we'd still go right over the cliff. And so, again, what I wanted to show you is just how many different kind of things came up. And we started with about 300 solutions and winnowed them down to these based on impact. So they're all based on impact. This transport, I'm not going to read them off to you. You can do that yourself. Energy, concentrated solar, wave and tidal, etc. This is offshore wind turbines, and this was not Photoshop. That's the only thing I want to tell you about this. But this is actually, so often you see wind turbines, and you see this beautiful green hill, and there's a wind turbine on top, there's children playing in the foreground, and there's wildflowers, and the sky's blue, and you're going, oh man, that's so cool, that's the future. That is a really crappy place to put a wind turbine. You want to put them here where the weather is really bad. And this is the North Sea off Norfolk, the Sheringham Shoal, and that's a triathlete going by, these Siemens 3 megawatt wind turbines. Buildings and cities, again, just get a sense of the diversity of solutions that are out there, because we tend to just think it's about clean energy and a few other things. And land use, again, the peatland there, those stripes you see are what the land looks like after they take the peat away. And on top you see that it's a forest, or it was a forest. And peat harvesting is for gardens mostly now. Come on, you know, huge source of carbon that's being released. You showed system dynamics. This, when we model, you cannot model a solution by itself. You just can't. I mean, you can, and the data is punk. It's no good. But this is we call a bioseq model, or biosequestration model. In other words, when we analyze a solution, we have to do it in this context. That's why I said the models are complex, and we needed a lot of input to make sure the models were correct. It's easy, as you know, even in an Excel spreadsheet, to make a mistake. And these are some of the food solutions. And this is improved rice cultivation. Rice is a big emitter of methane. Methane occurs when green matter is in an anaerobic environment. Methane is 34 times more powerful than CO2 and its global greenhouse warming potential. And there's two ways to do it. Either way produces more rice, and it's cheaper to do, so there's no cost. And all it takes is a farmer to walk across his or her paddy to the next farmer and teach them. There's no cost to do this. It's just education. This is an interesting one. This is women smallholders. And again, I want you, we were just as surprised maybe as you are right now, like, what's this doing on a thing about reversing global warming, you know? Well, smallholders are defined as farmers with less than 5 acres, 2 hectares. And 75% of the food in the world is produced by smallholders. And 25% of the food is produced by big ag, or corporate ag, or Monsanto, Syngenta, Dow ag, or whatever you want to call that ag. And I started in the organic food business when I was 20 years old. It was in Boston. And for a decade, I got from professors at Harvard and MIT, shamed, you hippie, selfish, narcissistic people who want your food without pesticides, without, using industrial methods, If everybody did that, the world would starve. I mean, we just got that again and again about how selfish we were and how industrial ag was the only way we could feed the world. And anybody else who said otherwise basically, had their head up somewhere. And yet, what does big ag do? It produces 25% of the food, but really, what really does it produce? It produces soy and corn for pigs and cows. It produces McDonald's burgers. It produces McDonald's French fries. It produces hydrogenated fats. It produces sugar. It produces white flour. Okay? Basically, it produces big pharma. It doesn't feed the world. It sickens the world. And it sickens the earth, and sickens the waterways, and destroys soil and makes it into dirt. That's big ag. And over 40% in some continents, 43 and some 50% of smallholders are women. Women produce more food in the world than big ag. Just do the math. That's what we do. We do math. This isn't our belief. This is math. And if women get the same support that men get in terms of seed tools and training and tenure, my goodness, they outproduce men by 20 to 30%. So that's what we scaled here, was really supporting women smallholders in the world. And what happens in that reduced CO2 is avoided deforestation. In other words, you don't have to cut down more trees because you can produce more food on the land you have. This is a plant-rich diet. It means really Reducing protein intake in developed countries where we overconsume protein, especially animal protein, and increasing it in those nations or places where people have insufficient amount to about 50, 55 grams per person, and then shifting a significant amount of that protein to seeds and pulses and grains and legumes and plant-based. Number 4, rank. Who knew? We didn't. Regenerative ag. This actually isn't a very good picture, but it's the organic. It's the Rodale Institute in Emmaus, and they coined the term, so kind of homage to them. But actually, regenerative agriculture looks very different. Regenerative agriculture is so much more important than just, it's not just organic farming on steroids. Regenerative agriculture is looking at the soil, at farms, as completely differently. And what happens in regenerative agriculture is you don't till the soil. You don't kill the soil, you don't till the soil. You leave a crop on at all times, even in the winter. But especially in the spring, you sow into cover crops. Basically, soil, a plant is a solar panel. A plant is a solar panel. It eats CO2 and powers that CO2 into sugar with photons, right? Light, right? That's what it does. So plants make sugar. What do they do with the sugar? Well, they grow, but most of it goes down below to the roots. And what happens down there is that they exudates, I'm sure it's been covered already, but into the soil. What do the exudates do? They feed bacteria there. What do bacteria do? They break down the minerals into nutrients for the plant. So now you have a cycle where the plants get more nutrients, they grow better, they're more pest resistant, they're more productive. But also, as you put more sugar into, basically into the root systems, you get more life. What does life do? Life creates the conditions conducive to life, is what it does, and you get more water. In certain tracts of land, you can get 100x times more water using regenerative agriculture than what is presently there today. And what I want to emphasize is it's not just the quality of the food, it's in-farm fertility. You're using animals to cut the grass or to cut to graze it. You're not basically using glyphosate. But what this can do is literally grow water. I don't mean literally, but I mean it in a literal sense. By growing this way, we can bring water back into the earth. When there's more hydration of the earth, the temperature goes down. And what global warming does is put more water in the sky, but it puts it in there in a very strange hydrologic cycle, which means there's no water for a long time, and then there's too much water. And that was predicted 50 years ago, so this is not news. And we saw it in Southern California, 4 years of drought, fire, 1 day of amazing rains and mudslides, right? Boom. I mean, that is classic pattern recognition of what global warming does. But we can bring that water back down and put it in the soil, making crops more resilient and literally transforming our landscapes all over the world. It's such an important solution. This is reduced food waste. It's the number 3 solution. We waste 133 billion pounds. You're probably going over that in this class, but a year in the United States, over 40%. Some people say 45%. Mostly at the supermarket, at restaurants, and at home, and refrigerators where food goes to die in this culture. And this does not count the methane emissions from landfilled food, which would make it much higher than that. It's the number 3 solution. I just want to give you, again, some other food solutions. There's a billion hectares of degraded land. And, this is degraded land if it's empty, this cup or this glass. It can hold a lot of carbon, degraded land, because it's been taken out. So degraded land is a huge opportunity on many levels. Clean cook stoves, nutrient management is, of course, nitrous oxide running down the Mississippi, killing the Gulf, the dead zones all over the world. Silver pastures, we don't know how old that technique is at least 2,500 years old. More tree intercropping, which is a form of agroforestry, composting, of course, managed, AMP, holistic. There's so many terms for basically grazing ruminants the way they would in a herd in a grassland, which is to stay close together and keep moving and not revisit the same grassland for 6 months or a year. And tropical staple trees. Again, these are solutions we don't hear about. They're really important. And then we also included 20 what we call coming attractions, and these two relate to food that I want to show tonight. Marine permaculture was invented by a plasma physicist, and what it is PET frames that, and PET plastic doesn't break down in salt water. I'm not sure why. But frames under the water, 25 meters under, with tubes that go down to the thermocline where the cold, nutrient-laden waters are. And I don't know if you remember, like 2-3 years ago, we had a big pinniped population die-off in California. Why? Well, because we're getting these thermal blankets. 93% of the warming that's occurred so far is going into the oceans, not to the land. And you're getting these thermal blankets, and it's suppressing the natural circulation patterns. And normally there's this huge upwelling off the Farallones, which is why we have so many white sharks there and so forth. And when that upwelling didn't happen, then you had a die-off of the sea lions and the seals, etc. And so what this does is have tubes down to the thermocline that are actuated by the rise and fall of the bay or the sea or the ocean, wherever these are placed. And this is what you get in 3 or 4 weeks from nothing in a marine desert. You get phytoplankton, zooplankton, you get algae, you get kelp, you get feeder fish, forage fish. In other words, you get this trophic cascade because life will regenerate if you create the conditions for it. It automatically does it. It's the default mode of nature, is to regenerate. And so a lot of these solutions, regenerative agriculture, for example, are about getting out of the way and guiding it for sure, you know, to needs we have, but not trying to outmaneuver it. And this one, a cow walks onto a beach. As you may know, ruminants, there's 3.3 billion cows and sheep basically being raised for meat in the world. You know, about just a little under half the population is in animals. For us, they correspond to 11% of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of methane, enteric emissions. There was a farmer, a dairy farmer in Prince Edward Island who noticed that his cows, this is not Prince Edward Island, as you can tell. I think PEI wishes it was, but it's not. He noticed that the cows that ate kelp produced more milk, and the question was why. And he went to his county agent, who didn't know either, and went to a scientist, and said it must be because they're not producing as much methane, because it's such an inefficient metabolic and useless process, by the way, for a ruminant methane production. And so they separated the herd and put bags over the ones who, well, all of them, you know, 5 times a day to measure the methane emissions for those who ate kelp and those who didn't. And sure enough, there was less methane emissions from the cows eating kelp, but it was a science project. Like, so what? What are you going to do with that information? There's not that much kelp in the world. And they had to eat a lot of it, too. But that scientist heard of a scientist in Queensland. And together they began to work on something that would work. And they found a seaborne algae called Asparagopsis taxiformis, which if fed in a 2 to 3% as a 2 to 3% supplement to ruminants, reduces methane emissions by 70 to 90%. And so this being studied now at Stanford, I mean, the race is on to commercialize Asparagopsis taxiformis, you know, for carbon credits, hopefully. This is what surprised us. I mean, I said the biggest sector was food. It wasn't electrical generation, it was food. And if you look at the sectors from the IPCC, the 2 biggest sectors are agriculture, food, and transport. Here, you see food being number one, and you see transport on the right being really small. Well, what happened? When we modeled electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, I mean, we modeled it. So why isn't that bigger? Because we use the reference case, which is it is assumed that the number of vehicles will double by 2050. So a lot of the efficiency is being basically wiped out by doubling. I don't think that's true. By the way, I think it's going to go the other way around. I think we're going to use less and less cars. And I think more and more people think that, but that's what we modeled. But food is number one for two reasons. One is it's either first or second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, methane, nitrous oxide, CO2. But if we change our agricultural practices, then it can sequester carbon. No, it's a twofer. And very few of these things are twofers, go both ways. Food goes both ways. This you have probably seen before. And basically, it's a NASA, it's probably, it's 2006, but the dynamics are the same. And it shows carbon emissions, and the darker the orange or the red or the vermilion is, the more concentrated the emissions are of CO2. And you can see the counter on the left-hand corner. And you'd think by, April they would go down, but what happens is they go up in April and May. And the reason is because farmers are plowing, releasing so much CO2 into the air by breaking the soil. But finally, in June, actually the grass or the crops and the trees and, they're growing, and they're now sequestering CO2, and they're emitting oxygen. So as you see it get bluer and bluer, that represents oxygen. So when we titled our NGO in the book Drawdown, people said, well, that's so ambitious. I thought, to want to have civilization go on, I don't think that's ambitious. But in other words, people said, that's so ambitious. And every year, we draw down 6 to 7 ppm. That's the point. In other words, drawdown happens every year. That's why when you look at the Mauna Loa data, it's sawtooth, right? It's not a straight line. It's like a sawtooth. So it goes up and then it goes down. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up. It's going up more than it's going down, for sure, by 2.5 roughly ppm per year. But so achieving drawdown isn't so far out as it may seem. And the heroes in this classroom and frankly in our study is these guys, stoma cells and guardian cells, stomata. And when you have a handful of leaves like this, you have 100 million stomata in your hand. And what do? They eat CO2 for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's what they do. And they're uncountable, the number of them. But what's so interesting about stomata, though, is that they've been recently studied and computer modeled. And what they discovered is they can hear the dawn chorus when the birds wake up in the morning. They have memory. I love that. Yeah, me too. You go to ag school? I grew up on a farm, so I'm with you. He's like looking, no, not possible. They have memory in terms of the weather going back several days. They can detect the temperature. They can detect how much moisture is in the plant. They can detect how much moisture is in the roots of the plant. And they can detect the moisture in the soil surrounding the roots. So they can do all that. If stomata stay closed all day long, the plant dies. If it stays open all day long, the plant dies. If it stays closed, they don't eat, they starve. If it's open, they lose all their moisture. So these stomata, and just go outside after this talk, look at all the plants, and they're all alive. That's because of this. So the decision-making, if you want to call it that, is extraordinary. The intelligence of stomata is just remarkable. And the appreciation that you spoke of what's going on out there in nature is just becoming more and more fascinating than we ever thought or ever knew. I just want to finish with this one slide, and it's about language. 99% of the world is disengaged about global warming. It is. I mean, and why? And I don't think it's the fault of that 99%. I think it's the fault of the climate movement, frankly. The science is extraordinary. 2.5 billion data points on the last assessment, behind the 5th assessment. It's the best problem statement the world has ever seen. It's a gnarly one, but it's a credible problem statement. From my point of view, problems are solutions in disguise. Every problem is a solution, points to a solution. In the case of global warming, it points to a plethora of solutions. But the language we're using around it, look at it. It's so negative, first of all. So negative. Second of all, we're using war metaphors. Fight, combat, battle. What in the heck are we thinking about? I mean, climate is a blessing. And then we're fighting climate change. Think about that one. I mean, climate is supposed to change. That's exactly what it does and always will. And you can fight it all day long and it doesn't care what you think or which verb you use. It's what it's supposed to do. But there's a deeper problem with that. There's this language, which is not only is it war and sports metaphors and, you know, slashing emissions with your carbon machete, I guess. I don't know what they're talking about here. Curbing climate change is what you do. You curb dogs in Manhattan. Come on, you know, curb climate. You know, it's like these words are so odd. But importantly, what they are is they're objectifying and separating ourselves from the whole of life. The atmosphere was created by living organisms. That's what created the atmosphere. And so the idea that somehow we know better and that we can fight it and we can win is the same thinking that has objectified nature, that objectifies people of other races or religions, that has objectified women. That's the same mindset. This idea that there's something other out there, and therefore, because it's other, you can say, do, act, whatever you want to do, because it's not within your sphere. It's not you. And you see that so much in this culture right now. It's just painful. And you see resistance to it, which is just pleasurable, but which is fantastic. But I'm saying we're doing the same thing about climate. We're acting as if it's a problem and we're going to beat it and solve it, you know. And look at the solutions, negative emissions. I'm sorry, I'm an English major. That doesn't mean a damn thing. If you've seen a negative emission, tell me. I want to look at it with you. A negative tree, what's a negative dog? I mean, it's just, there's no such thing, you know. Decarbonization, as if that was a solution. Decarbonization is the name of the problem. It's what we did. We took carbon in the soil, in the forest, in deposits of coal, gas, and oil, and put it up there. That's what we did. Recarbonization is the solution, not decarbonization. And finally, 2C. I mean, most Americans can't even tell you what it means in Fahrenheit, but we hear this again, 2C, 2 degrees Celsius, 2050. We can't go past it. It's a science-based target. You hear it all the time. First of all, it is not science-based. It was pulled out of thin air by Richard Nordhaus in 1975, an economist at Yale. And he says, I pulled it out of thin air. And Joachim Schellenhuber, a climate scientist in Germany, did it in 1994, unaware of Nordhaus, and said, I pulled it out of thin air. Both agree. They just pulled it because it's simple. People can understand it. Don't go over 2C more than pre-industrial levels. Okay. But what I'm saying here is that means go to anybody, go on the street, go to anybody, walk up and say, what does 2C mean to you in 2050? Huh? Well, 2 degrees Celsius, you know what I'm talking about. Huh? Well, are you worried about that in 2050? Huh? It doesn't mean anything to anybody in the world. Talk to a woman, you know, in Botswana, you know, with their children saying, hi, what do you think about 2C? It's like, what are you talking about? But it could be Boston, it could be Belgium. It means nothing. And what happened is we're using future existential threat, because that's what they're talking about. Beyond 2C, something really bad is going to happen. What? We're not sure, but it's going to be really bad. Don't go there, right? That's the implication of it. But really, that's a future existential threat. And our brains are not wired that way. The people who were worried about future existential threat aren't in the gene pool anymore. They're gone. The people, your ancestors got the current existential threats really well. They took food, security, warmth, etc. They did that really well. It's why you're here today. That's it. Literally, a brain can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. And yet that's what we're using to motivate people. And really what we're talking about here, in order to get this going, is to really, we have to be a movement that addresses current human needs. We're the only species without full employment. Think about that one. There's 10 million species, all busy during the day and they sleep at night, okay? Or vice versa. But I mean, they're busy, seem happy, and we have discovered a way to marginalize our species and make people feel like they have no value. And then in this country, we create the prison industrial complex, put them in jail, make money off them, or, you know, arrest them for putting on graffiti to express their rage at being disvalued. How do we do that? And we do it because we have a degenerative model of economic development. We steal the future. We're stealing it and selling it in the present and calling it GDP. And the answer, the way forward, and you look at these solutions, look on the website. You have to buy the book. Just look on the website. And basically, we're talking about regenerative solution, which is we can heal the future and sell that in the present and call that GDP. And if we're going to solve this, we have to make everybody feel like they're valuable. There's so much work. Never has there been so much good work to do. And never have so many people been marginalized. Never has there been so many needs, human needs, as there is right now because there's so many people. Never have so many people felt like they don't count. Trump is elected by people who think they don't count. That's really comes down to that. And so if we're going to solve this, and I think we are, by the way, I really do, you can turn to the back of the book and see how the ending is, by the way. Or you can read the whole thing first, whatever you want to do. But I think we are going to solve it, and I think we can. But the core of it, though, is to make people, to create jobs that give people a sense of purpose, of respect. That's what people want. Our needs are all the same. We want to be respected by our family, by our children, you know, by our community. We want to do things that help others. We want to do things that make us secure and safe in our homes, in our community. We're all the same, you know, and that's not the world we live in right now. And those things are very related. And that's your slide. So anyway, that's drawdown. And food, I just want to emphasize, is huge. It's much bigger than I think anybody understood. Certainly ourselves, when we started it, we would have made a top 10 list, and I think managed grazing would have been there, that's it, on the top 10 list. We were all wrong, and what I'm really proud of my team is that the methodology we used was basically forfended against bias. We had biases, we all have biases. And they were excluded, and so I don't have the top 10 list here. Somehow I excluded that slide, I apologize. But the number one solution was refrigerant management. I mean, you're going, what? And when we saw that, we were so disappointed. We were just, no, it can't be, we must have made a mistake. And it's so unsexy, and I can just see the press release now, and no. And, you know, and it was the number one solution. But the number 6 solution, though, was educating girls. You know, and that was a surprise to everyone, too. So Anyway, I'll stop now. Thank you. And then there's the Q&A time. Yeah.
We want to invite all of you to be in conversation with Paul tonight. So if you have a question, it would be really great to come to the microphone, even line up down here or up there. Last week, unfortunately, I missed a couple people because I didn't see them. So if you have a question, or we can make this more of a conversation. Some of you in your feedback said we want to have more time for questions, so we can get started. One thing, maybe just to start while you're thinking about your questions, I was struck that, well, let me go back. So edible education, I think, is in its 7th year here at Berkeley, and Alice and Michael Pollan started it in the journalism school, and I remember you were part of that, and then it moved to the College of Natural Resources. Now it's being hosted by the business school, and a lot of the students are really interested in entrepreneurial solutions and how they're going to participate in, sort of driving, shaping and driving the innovations. And I was struck that it took an entrepreneur to sort of see the gap between, like all the science is there, we have the data, we have the math, right? But that translation piece is kind of missing. You're saying, like, we've got the wrong language. We're not communicating this in a way that it is calling people to action or giving them a roadmap. So maybe talk a little bit about how the entrepreneurial mindset informed this project.
Well, I've always said as an entrepreneur, if you have an idea and everybody thinks it's a good idea, it's too late. So that's the weird thing about being an entrepreneur, is that most good ideas seem a little off to most people when they first arise in you, and then you have to have either a sixth sense or be able to see around the corner, or faith in something, and because there's a good chance that they're right as well. And you're going to fail. And so finding that sense of reality, and for me, it's always been about looking at the way the world is, operates, buys, consumes, thinks, whatever it is, and seeing where it's going, trying to say, where is it going? And then say, well, if I create a service or product that is there, it'll intersect with how the world is morphing and changing. So to me, that's how I in my companies, that's how I've done it, basically. And it's a guess, but it's a guess based on reality, or at least the perception or interpretation of reality at that moment. It's not meant to be, you're not trying to make the world the way you think it ought to be. You're trying to create what ought to be done given where the world is going. So slightly different, then it's not delusional, and you can see entrepreneurs who are very delusional. They don't get very far because they don't get funding, but you hear about it a lot.
Well, a lot of people get funded today, actually.
Well, there is a lot of money floating around. Yeah.
But when I saw the book, and we actually have a course here at Berkeley in the graduate program called Food Venture Lab, which is sort of a social entrepreneurship course around food innovation. And a couple of the students saw this book last semester, and they were like, wow, this is like the roadmap for social innovation in food, or any of these sectors that you focused on.
Well, because when you model something, you have to model the thing. You can't model, for example, climate smart agriculture. It's a term used by climate scientists. No such thing. It's just a generality. You can't model agroforestry. You can model tree intercropping, silvopasture, multi-strat agroforestry, because there's science about that. There's data, there's examples, but you can't model generalities. So one of the things that happened, which was a lovely surprise, but is that the land use solutions, both on the food side and on the land use, kept growing, because we had to be specific. We need specific data. So there's 21 land use solutions there. And the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if you look at their summary reports, they refer to ag and forests. There's ag, and there's forests. Ag is a problem, it's an emitter, and forests don't cut trees. And I mean, really, the bias there has been towards, you know.
And again, different disciplines, different bureaucracies managing them.
Yeah, I mean, none of these guys grew up on a farm, apparently. I don't know, but the bias was very evident for years, and it's changing now, but the land use was marginalized as if, well, just don't ruin it anymore and don't cut trees and stuff like that. But instead of using the land as a way to regenerate, not just the atmosphere, but, you know, again, water, villages, towns, cities, places, you know, rivers, biodiversity. It goes on and on. It regenerates. It doesn't stop in terms of what it does and doesn't regenerate. Yeah.
So one of the other things I was hoping you could touch on, just for the benefit of the students, because this class attracts people from all across the campus in different programs. So it seems like, you know, some of the things are, let's you know, focus on these technologies and scale up their adoption, but there's got to be a lot of public policy and education, and it just seems like there's multifaceted opportunities across sort of participating in the implementation of this playbook.
Well, of course, we feel that good policy is based on great data and bad policy is based on ideology. So, I mean, you know, and so the better the data, the better the chances are a municipal, a county, or state, provincial level, or even federal, that the policy will be based on, you know, will be a good policy.
Is this getting into policymakers' hands?
Not at all. Oh yes, it's getting into the hands. We don't touch policy. We don't touch that. Yeah, no, all over. By the end of this year, I mean, so far this year, it'll be in 72 countries, the book, in 11 languages, actually 15 languages, excuse me. And it's now going into 23 different universities where the model will be there, and then the idea is that the model is localized, regionalized to, you know, a biophysical, socio-political boundary where it actually means something. Global models are fascinating, but they're not applicable. You can't apply that to California or Alameda County, or you can't. It just doesn't work, you know, because the data is too generalized. But so that includes, you know, Monash and ANU in Canberra, and London, Imperial College, Terry in Hyderabad, this campus, UC Davis, University of Washington, MIT, Northwestern, Penn State, Georgia Tech, oh, I forget all the names, but I mean, so that was the idea, was that the model be open source, transparent, and basically then be, migrate, you know, where it can become better, where we are a coalition. We are a coalition, that's our ethos. And we're not here to tell people what to do. We're not here to, we don't even say we know. What we did is actually get data from the world, and on the economic side, from IEA, you know, International Energy Agency, from the World Bank, from the IPCC, from the FAO, and then on all the greenhouse gases, all from peer-reviewed science. And we always chose the low median if there was a divergence. So always very conservative numbers. And then what we did is hold a mirror up to the world and say, this is what you're doing and this is what you know. We're not saying we know, drawdown.org, we know. We're not saying that at all. We're saying, take a look. This is you. And that's very different than sort of having a white charismatic male vertebrate, you know, come on, say, follow me. And that's the problem, by the way, not the solution. And so what we're seeing is that, I said that, you know, a farm, regenerative agriculture, or anything you see in nature is a self-organizing system. And so one of the things that came out of this, is coming out of this, is there must be, I don't know how many hundred organizations in the world. One of them is called Drawdown Toronto. But I mean, that are starting up around the world and that are based on drawdown, but we don't manage them. We don't tell them what they can do. The name's not trademarked. We're not in charge. We didn't start them. We just help in whatever way we can, you know, support them with data or this, and connect them to draw down Bendigo and draw down, you know, I mean, there's so many other cities and places now, you know, draw down Caledon, draw down Nova Scotia, draw down, you know, in fact, draw down Nova Scotia was connected and created draw down Toronto, you know, and there's draw down Marin, there's draw down this, and so we think that the proper role of drawdown in the expanding universe of universities and NGOs and so forth is to create the conditions that for humanity to self-organize around reversing global warming, as opposed to being in the know, you know, which I don't think anybody's
using the whole self-organizing paradigm for your organization itself as a catalyst.
Yeah. It's like Janine, that essay at the end called Reciprocity, you know, when she's talking about we use, you know, that mutualism is much more prevalent than competition in forests and nature and grasslands and so forth, and that we got it all wrong. We projected onto it, you know, sort of dog eat dog or tree eat tree, you know, idea that somehow all the plants are in competition for water and air and light, and that's just not true, actually. They're a community, and very intricate communities. And back to stomata, I mean, plants have 21 different senses. We have 5. Plants have 16 senses that we don't have. And you know, read about them. They're like, what? And you know, it's like, what are those other senses? You know, and so forth. But I mean, it's just amazing. What we're discovering is that life is so exquisitely, miraculously beautiful and interconnectedly kind, as opposed to what we projected onto it, which is, you know, well, we know what that is, those metaphors. And so organizationally, we look at the situation, we think there has been a failure in communication, but given this is the greatest crisis civilization has ever faced, and I dare say may ever, and we feel the answer is how we talk to each other, how we see each other, and if we don't make a tent big enough for everybody, it's the wrong tent. You know, and there's not one word in this that makes people wrong, or shames people, or blames people, or, you know, points fingers at people. You know, why do that? We haven't got time for that. We have time to do things that are constructive, that help, that create, that generate, that are generous, that are compassionate, that connect. And the way you heal any system, whether it's an immune system or social system or an ecosystem, is to connect more of it to itself. That's how you heal a system. That's how it heals itself. And so that's our role, all of us, is to connect more of us to each other, to ourselves, and as opposed to, again, being right, you know, and having some hierarchical organization that says, you know, that pretends it knows. We don't do that, actually. And
it's very inspiring now, you know, and especially at this time, to create a model like that. And well, we have some people that have some questions here. Why don't we hear from the audience, the class?
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. In somewhat dark times, this has been a beacon of inspiration and a way to at least feel like you can be part of the solution and not have a nihilistic bent on life. One of my questions relates to college institutions themselves, and I think my surprise how far corporate money, especially chemical money, has changed what is researched. And oftentimes, while we're trying to start businesses that are related to regenerative solutions, the data point isn't there. And in such an empirically driven society, how do we get institutions like Berkeley to do more research on these topics and less on how do I reduce pesticide usage by 20%?
It's a good question. I mean, you know, as I said, I grew up here and I've watched the corporate influence on Berkeley, you know, and become more and more pronounced. The interesting thing, like say in ag itself, you know, the problem is there's no money in regenerative ag for big companies. the farms we talk about, not the one you saw, but the ones we talk about in drawdown have in-farm fertility. They don't have any inputs now. And their profits are up, the productivity is up. I mean, and you're seeing a whole, from Saskatchewan right on down to Texas, you're seeing these rooms like this, only flat, you know, and there's just old men with cowboy boots and cowboy hats or baseball caps, you know, sitting like this, you know, looking at these PowerPoint presentations about no-till, no-kill. They're because they've hit the wall financially, and they go, that's it, I'm out of here. And the biggest obstacle, interestingly, to them is crop insurance, because crop insurance in the U.S. will pay 80% of your crop if you use chemicals and fertilizers, but if you don't get crop insurance. And so making that transition, because basically the farmers in this country are on crack, and it takes, you know, to get off crack, basically, it doesn't take a day, it takes a couple of years, you know. And so in terms of the universities, you know, UC Davis, I mean, we see it. I was with Penn State this morning, all morning, meeting with heads of schools there, and they're taking on drawdown in a very, very big way. And what they said in commenting about that, it's not so much a problem there, but is to make sure everything is interdisciplinary. They really focus on interdisciplinary, not just the student herself or himself in terms of their degree, but actually the schools themselves, you know. Architecture is in engineering, and then architecture is in design. You have two architecture schools, and that they talk to each other too. So what they're doing is starting to, you know, cross-fertilize themselves, you know, instead of that Victorian legacy of siloed, you know, disciplines, you know, which is vestigial now, because it, you know, but I do think that the solutions, there's still this idea that somehow if big government gets it, then we're okay. And I just think, wow, I'm not going to live my life thinking if I'm waiting for the time for big government to get it. I mean, that's like, how foolish. I'd be like waiting, you know, for fairies. I mean, it's just not going to happen, you know. But the solutions you see in drawdown are really middle out. It's not like bottom up. I don't like that. Bottom up implies there's a top. I don't think there's a top. There's dysfunction in some places. Really, where the function is in the middle, and that's where the solutions really are originating and scaling from. If a government gets it, like Denmark or Germany or Sweden, or it's like hallelujah, and it does accelerate everything. But we shouldn't function in such a way that we wait for larger institutions, whether the universities or the federal government, to get it, because I don't think that's going to happen in the time span that we need to act within. Yeah.
Much. I feel so much more enlightened after hearing you speak, and it definitely got me, and I'm sure many people in this room, very passionate. Something I really appreciate about drawdown, and this kind of leads on from the last question, is how solution-oriented it is. I think that's really important, and the approach of, like you said, holding a mirror up. My concern is if you hold up a mirror to the, at least this is the perception I have, you hold up a mirror to the food industry, and they know it. This isn't necessarily new information, and they keep doing it. You hold this mirror up to policymakers, and same thing, they just keep going. Even like you mentioned earlier, the reason why Trump got elected, you can attribute that partially to people who feel like their voice didn't matter. You hold up the mirror to them and they're not gonna care. But I'm worried that if we keep on this track of holding up the mirror, as important as this extraordinary research is, we do need solutions, because while this isn't a battle on climate change, we are, every one of us in this room, every one of us on this planet, all of us are a part of the food industry, of the food system, and we need solutions, and there's something we need to do. So I would love your thoughts on that.
Well, the last sentence, we need solutions, and something is something we need to do. And what we're saying is, we have the solutions, and we're doing them. That's the mirror. If somebody doesn't want to look at the mirror, well, that's their blindness, okay? But the mirror is there to be looked at. If you don't look at it, you're not going to see what's in it. And so, and that's what we really wanted to emphasize, rather than I think there's a thing where we think, well, we're not doing enough. I mean, that's kind of another way of paraphrasing what you said, or it's a theme, runs it. We're not doing enough. And I would say this, which is fossil fuels had a 200-year head start. And it's kind of like going on to whatever, like let's say a basketball game or whatever, and it's the first quarter and you've spotted the other team 90 points, and that's where we are, And so at the end of the first quarter, it can be 100-15, but actually you're outplaying your opponent. And I actually think we're outplaying our opponent. It's just that the momentum and the inertia of the fossil fuel industry, of industrial ag, of so many things that are really insults to people in place, which is have this tremendous amount of inertia. And we shouldn't keep staring at that and thinking that somehow we're not doing enough, because that is a terrible way to live, first of all. It's a terrible way it's hard on your mind and your heart, and who wants to live that way, And I think that what we're seeing in the world, when I said that self-organizing, and maybe John can speak to it, we're seeing people say, got it, got the problem, and now we're going to go and celebrate the solutions, work on it, and figure out how to do this, And we have I just came back from Australia, and there's a couple hundred companies that are going to be drawdown companies. And what they do is and I asked them, I said, just commit and admit. Commit to doing it, admit you don't know how. That's it. But we know where North Star, we know where we're going, and this is what we're going to do, we'll figure it out. We're all making this up as we go along. So it's not like we should know. We don't know, But what we know now because of the research, and a lot more to come, by the way. This is a living research project. There's not just a second edition. There's a whole book on regeneration coming out, which is about process and systemic and economic complexity, about jobs. The subtitle of regeneration is How to Create 1 Billion Jobs. And we're serious about it, using economic complexity theory from Ricardo and Hausman at MIT and Harvard, and about implementing these solutions. But so what we're seeing is this huge uptake, and I feel like there's a hunger in the world to know what to do. And again, when you hear solar, wind, and Teslas, you go, again, the thing of it kind of leaves you out when actually the very first thing you can do tonight, don't throw a scrap of food away ever again, ever. There's a solution. It's a huge solution. And I know my wife, who is Spanish-speaking, Italian, and Argentinian, that's the solution made the biggest impact on me. I always felt guilty when I scraped something off, going, oh shoot, compost or not. It just felt bad, because I know as a farmer and as somebody who's a gardener how much work it takes to produce food. Just like it didn't feel honoring, much less the waste. And now I eat everything, and there was one night, there was rice, and there was a little bit of, mold on the rice, and little thing, beautiful little blue kind of things coming off of it. And my wife said, oh, how could you do that? You're animalito, she's called me. And I said, if I don't do this, I'll keep repeating this pattern of taking too much, cooking too much, buying too much. And the only way I can learn to stop doing that is to eat my habit, and that's the only way it'll change it, and it's sometimes in the morning, go, I don't want to eat this. I eat it, because not only has it been out all night, but it was dinner, and I don't want dinner for breakfast, but I'm just saying is that, so there are things you can do right now, in terms of those solutions, but people ask me well, people ask me, what should I do? People raise their hands, well, what should I do? You've got this list, what should I do? I said, I have no idea what you should do, because we just met. And if I told you what to do, you should run, because that would be so wrong. But you know what to do. And you can use this, you can use it as a thing, and we'll go through and look at, and then you open up a page, and all of a sudden you light up, like, wow, how interesting. I know, I want to know. this is something, you know, educating girls, you know, women, small, whatever it is, it lights you up, that's probably where you should go. That's what you want to do. And so that's what the solutions are about, you know, is this array of things that are out there that we are doing. This is so important to emphasize. We are doing it. And what we haven't done on the website is educate, activate. Educate means, I want to know more about this. You know, thanks for sharing, but I want to know a lot more. So, you know, it can be videos, documentaries, it can be magazine articles, it can be, you know, whatever, peer-reviewed papers. But also activate. I want to do something about this one. And it's going to, and we have that. We just haven't got up on the website yet, you know. So
I remember when Lisa Gansky did that with the sharing. She wrote that book, The Mesh, and she started to just catalog all of the entrepreneurial solutions that were starting, you know, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. And this just, looking at this book, just if you have an entrepreneurial, you know, orientation, this book is like just a gold mine.
And wait till you see what's coming. We have D2 coming. D2 is Drawdown 2, and it's 60 to 80 more coming attractions. And they're just like, wow, you know. I mean, we have about 200 or 300 in our database, and they're just amazing. And what we want to also reflect back to people is just how brilliant we are, and ingenious, and caring, and I mean, the things that are being invented and discovered and right now are just, it's just amazing. It's kind of like if you do feel bad or hopeless, you know, then you can read this and then read D2 as well, you know, and you go, humanity is on the case. That's what I want to say. We are on the case, and that's not what we get reflected back in our media, for sure, because our media is based on those first two slides, which is to scare the pee out of you. If it's not about climate, it'll be about Trump. It'll be anything you want, it'll work. If it's about the Bachelor episode where he dumped his girlfriend, it'll be about the Bachelor episode. No matter what it is, it's about making you go, ah. Okay, so that media is not going to reflect back to you who we are and what we're doing and who we are as human beings. And so,
what I like too is you're really calling for a different kind of organization. I mean, even in modeling the sort of self-organizing system, you're calling on kind of a different kind of leadership, different kind of governance, different kind of cooperation, different kind of reciprocity and generosity, care. I mean, the ethos of the gardener is care. You know, so you're bringing the gardener's ethos to the solution making, you know, in Drawdown. So I think that's just a wonderful invitation. Is there another question over here? Somebody have a question?
You answered my question really, but I was going to ask, when you're talking about communication, because it seems to me like, you know, you're talking about a paradigm shift and a shift of perception. And it seems like the larger the scale of that shift, the more impact you're going to have in terms of change. So I was wondering, there's so many different forms of communication, and you know what your strategy was and how to get the word out on, you know, on a more mass scale.
Good. It's a really good question. I mean, one of the things, remember you saw that slide of our research fellows? And one of the things I want to say is, and this is true for entrepreneurs too, which is too little money is a blessing, not a curse.
Makes you resourceful.
It makes you resourceful. We never would have done that if somebody said, oh, here, you know, and then we would have had all these full-time people and paying them a lot of money in the Bay Area, and we would not have gotten the results. We wouldn't have created a coalition. We wouldn't be worldwide. We wouldn't have made all these friends. We wouldn't have, it's just, we're so grateful we didn't have money. Okay, so we still don't. And not that we don't want money. And so, you know, if your dad's a philanthropist, you know. But what's happened, we got approached by Hawken Productions. And so what they're going to do is create, in no particular, NGSS, Next Generation Science Standard curricula. And then short form videos of the solutions for both social media and for students. We'll create a sort of like 7 to 12 primer. We reduce, you know, just a smaller version, but you know, They're going to produce 50 videos called 50 Change Makers, people who are making changes. 50 Who Knews, like who knew, like, you know, gosh, didn't know that. They're going to produce 6 to 10 part on Netflix TV series on Drawdown, which is not going to be about solutions. It's going to be about human beings, and the solutions are innate into their narrative. Like one story, The Man Who Stopped the Desert, and one of them is called Making Starlight on Earth, and one episode is probably the solidarity people in Highland Park in Detroit who got all their lights taken away by the utility because they couldn't afford to pay the utility bills. And then they took the poles out as well, just to, you know, be really offensive. And so a group, it's a low-income area, mostly African American, and they started putting up solar-powered lights. And now they're competing with that utility to replace their light poles in other cities and so forth. So the Netflix series is not about, you know, I mean, really, HVAC, or I mean, come on. I mean, the solutions on them are boring. You know, it's like, oh, district heating. Oh, Netflix, I can't wait. Binge watching, you know. It's like, not going to happen. So they're really about stories, about how amazing people are and what they go through and so forth. And then there's a long-form documentary as well. So we don't have the money. They do. And we get to be EP and, you know, and work with that and so forth. So that's another form of communication. Like I said, it's in 15 languages, 72 countries this year. So people are, you know, publishing it. We don't know where. We don't know. We didn't sell it to them. They didn't come to our publisher. They just show up. Arabic, Vietnamese, you know, Korean, complex characters. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, here, take it. You know, so that's happening spontaneously. So, you know, so it's, I don't think all the responsibility is on us to communicate. I think the responsibility is to create the basis for people to communicate. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
My question is, in a world where externalities are not paid for and the ecosystem services provided by your solutions are not, you know, the value of it are not well recognized, how would you go about funding these solutions?
Well, again, just it's a great question, but there's a little fill-up at the end. How would you go about funding these solutions? First of all, I'm not a funder. Second of all, you meaning the editorial you. So how would they be funded, I think is the question. And what we saw, our nose was really pressed to the glass on the models, you know, for 2.5 years, you know. And we didn't actually know what the model would say until February last year. We hit the button because they're a system. And so kind of looked and this and that. But what we did see in the interim and definitely at the end is that I think we've reached the point I call it the crossover. And the crossover is that when I first suggested doing this in 2001, the cost of the solutions was far exceeded the cost of the problems. In other words, it's cheaper to destroy the Earth in real time in as much as it was measured in dollars. Okay, no, that's not true, of course, but it was in how we were using the metric of dollars or currency. And actually, I think we have hit and are hitting and will hit very soon the crossover point where actually the cost of the solutions is cheaper than the cost of the problems. I mean, wind turbine, onshore wind turbines are now the cheapest form of new electricity generation in the world for 90% of the world. It's the cheapest way to do it. Not coal, not combined cycle gas. When I talked about those farmers, you know, from in the Midwest, you know, when you talk to them and look at what they're doing, the cheapest way for them to farm is regeneratively. It's the most profitable way too, by the way. So, and that wasn't always true, by the way, because people didn't even know how to farm regeneratively. They farmed traditionally, and then they kept changing more and more. You know, when you look at internal combustion engines, you know, they're predicting, McKinsey and IA, that, you know, that electric cars will be cheaper than internal combustion by 2024. What's so interesting about that prediction is that the IEA and McKinsey didn't say it, but that's true for them too, have been wrong every year for 19 years about solar and wind and the growth and learning rate of that. Wrong, underestimated for 19 years in a row. Perfect, consistently wrong. And so I think the rate of innovation is actually much greater than is being ascribed to it. And so therefore, I think that's going to happen a lot sooner. And then one of our coming attractions is a company in Rancho Margarita that basically has can improve the efficiency of every electric car in the world by 30%. And when you hear how they do it, it's so simple, based on a principle of electrical flow from batteries to sink, source to sink, and they solved it accidentally. And when you think about Asparagopsis taxiformis, they're reducing worldwide emissions, you're starting to see marine permaculture. I mean, it deacidifies the ocean, it cools the water, it can reverse coral bleaching, and can create billions and billions of pounds of protein, And so you start to put these together, what you see is that innovation is going to outpace the inertia of externalities, which is very real. And the externalities will still be there. They're still being done by Koch Industries and Exxon and so forth. But they're going to be swept away, I think, by the change in the costs and of the solutions that internalize or don't externalize their costs. Yeah, thank you.
Tim Flannery in Australia. No, but I was at a conference with him in Australia, and he sort of replayed a scene from The Graduate where the guy whispers to Dustin Hoffman, plastics, but his word for this decade is seaweed. So the marine permaculture.
Hi.
Hi there. Well, thank you both, first of all. And I was actually in a permaculture class with Kevin Bayuk, one of your fellow researchers for this book.
Which one?
Kevin?
Oh, Kevin Bayuk.
Yeah. So that's how I learned about it.
He's a senior fellow, actually.
Oh, yeah, very, very well informed. So that's when I first learned about drawdown. I guess going to your earlier point, right? For entrepreneurs and people who want to contribute to this movement, to see where we're going, where we're heading to, and what we got to do to meet the demand of what we need in the coming decades. So let's say, with China and India in particular, population's already at 1.2 billion here, and maybe 1.4 billion in the other place very shortly, and also soon to grow with the one-child policy having been removed. I guess my question is, can you speak a little bit about, how to balance the juxtaposition? I feel like the Western world are starting to realize, hey, we better do something different because we've produced a lot of emissions over the luxuries that we've created. But yet that image has been so admirable to the Eastern world that now everyone, like the 2-point-something billion people, are starting to follow our footprint. And obviously, some of those countries are also doing some government policy changes to curb their emissions and whatnot. But I guess my question is, have you? What are some of the collaborations that you're doing, and what would you recommend for people who might be able to bridge the cultural gaps to participate and share the information between these countries and whatnot?
Well, one thing I'd say is don't go to sleep without it every night, because that's a big, you're taking on a big, huge thing, and I don't think you deserve it. I think it's not your problem, I would just, there's a tendency on the progressive side to take on these huge problems and think they're, and carry it around like this, and I would just say you could lighten up a little there. And just for your own sake, I appreciate the care in the question and the concern and the knowledge, though. I would say that what's happening, first of all, China, the last 5-year plan is based on natural capitalism, the book I did with Amory Lovins. The plan 4 plans ago was also based on natural capitalism. The 5-year plan coming up is based on ecological civilization. That is what China is going to base its 5-year plan on. And I would say the understanding, the knowledge, the literacy in China about climate and what to do is far greater than the United States. And that we tend to get a cartoon, well, actually a cartoon vision of the whole world from America, you know, I mean, you know, and very simplified and, you know, sort of, and I just think that, I mean, it's going to complex and simple characters, for example. Again, we didn't do that. It's going to the highest levels of the government, you know. When natural capitalism came out, I mean, it went to the highest levels of the Chinese government. They govern differently than we do, which means actually they can turn on a dime. And China does that very well, actually, you know, just boom. And we can't do that here. And I just say that the more we do here and do it well, we have an influence on the rest of the world. But I don't think we can influence the rest of the world by wanting it to change. We have no influence there, and again, you know, people have asked me too, and this holds true on a personal level, but on a, say, a national level. People say, what do you do about deniers, or what do you do about people who, you know, don't believe in, you know, global warming and so forth? And I said, nothing at all. Why would I want to do anything? And I said, why would I want to try to change somebody's mind? When was the last time you appreciated when somebody decided they wanted to change your mind? We don't like that. So it's not about changing people's minds. It's about creating the conditions in which people change, their own minds change. And it's going to happen a lot more easily out of something that's celebratory and joyous and solution-based, and that doesn't make people feel like crap, you know, and that the future is dark, you know, and foreboding, and that we can reverse it, you know. And that is it going to be a rough ride for the next decades, for sure, no question, you know. In terms of sea level rise, weather, drought, you know, hurricane, all that sort of stuff, it's going to be very difficult. But it's just two ways of looking at the world. And I would say with respect to Asia, the area where I think have the most concern is not China and India, it's actually Southeast Asia. I think that's the area where there is the greatest amount of occlusion, if maybe that's the right word, you know, Indonesia, Cambodia, you know, Vietnam, and places like that. I feel like that's Thailand where you don't really see the uptake as you see in China and India. Yeah. Yeah.
About one more question for tonight.
This kind of builds off of what you were just saying, but I guess my question is, you spoke a little bit about sort of the pitfalls of language in this world, and I was wondering if you could go down to sort of an individual level and public opinion level. You were just saying basically fear is one way to potentially change, or not change minds, but motivate people to do the right thing. Is there a way of talking about what these 100 things add up to as far as lived individual human experience that are actually qualitatively better than what we're doing now? Are there ways of sort of framing it in the positive that way as far as an individual? I'm thinking of, I'm from Boston, you know, the Bostonian who will vote the right way, liberal every way, but doesn't want it to actually impact them. Yeah. And so thinking about that kind of mentality, are there ways of framing this where these 100 things add up to a better day-to-day for an individual? Well, they do. And I think if you, whether on the website or the book you read about them, that's what you get. And that, like, this is better. Well, why aren't we doing this? Or why aren't I doing this? You know, and I mean, that's the question it poses. We don't pose the question,
but it poses it automatically, which is, you know, like that, you know, Billy Crystal movie with, you know, I want what she's having, you know? I mean, that line, I mean, which is spontaneous, by the way, it wasn't in the script. And it was Billy Crystal's mom who said that, you know? And, but I feel like, you know, when we're children, what sandbox do we want to play in? The one where they're hitting each other with their Tonka toy trucks, or the one where they're having fun? We went to the one where they're having fun, and that's what we did. That's who the kids we want to hang out with. So it's the same thing again, which is, let's go have fun. Let's reverse it. I mean, but not like as a duty, as obligation, as something full of guilt. Let's not be, you know, I'm Catholic, which is almost like being Jewish when it comes to guilt, you know. And it's just, I was, you know, raised being guilty, you know. I mean, and it doesn't work. It just does not work. It's not a, and nor does fear, threat, and doom. Because what that does, and we know very well from Tony Lassera with Ritz's work at Yale and so forth, it just shuts people down. And so what I love about the solutions, and there's more than, like I say, the book was limited by the number of pages. What I love about them is that they're just, fun sounds frivolous, but they're just so, they just make everything better for people. And there's two exceptions to that, and you can guess which ones they are, but all 98 of the 100 solutions are what we call no regrets, which is if there wasn't a climate scientist alive and we had no idea or clue as to what was causing extreme weather, there's just a plethora of reasons to do them. We want to do them anyway, you know, because of what we do for our children, for water, for health, for jobs, for prosperity, for, you know, I mean, let's do them. And that's what's so, again, we didn't choose them on that basis, we just chose the ones that had the greatest impact. And that's how they sort it out. And you can guess which two when you look at it, which, I don't think I think they're regret solutions. In other words, that's a regret. We do it, but we're gonna have regrets, you know. But the rest of them are no regrets. And I think that's what we have to move the conversation to, which is so that you don't have to understand the science. You don't have to be literate. Sometimes I'll go, like, I'm gonna go to an audience of 6,000 people, supply chain people. I won't say which company, but you can guess if they have 6,000 suppliers, which company that might be, and give a talk on this. And they said, look, a lot of these people don't believe in climate change, right? And I said, bring it on, I love it, I love it. That's my favorite audience. And, but what I'm gonna say when I go out there is like, how many of you don't believe in climate science or, you know, global warming? Just raise your hand, you know, and don't be shy. Come on, I'm not going to bite it. Just curious, you know. And it doesn't matter if anybody or a lot of people raise your hand. What I'm going to say is, you all should have raised your hand, every single one of you, because science is not a belief system. It's evidentiary. And in God we trust, all others bring data. We're about data, your supply chain. When's the last time you did something in a supply chain management as a CIO and said, because somebody said, I don't believe we should do this. You would never do that. So drawdown's about data and about math, you know, and so forth, you know. So again, you know, I feel like we can change the conversation so that, so somebody who doesn't believe it and say, forget about that. I don't want your belief in it. I'm not interested in belief. And people say also the book is, thank you for writing such a hopeful book. I said, we did not write a hopeful book. We did a reality project. That's what I love. That's what's hopeful about it. It's based on reality, as opposed to aspirations or if only if we just did this, you know, we could have that, and all this sort of whinging kind of liberal fantasy, you know, screw that. This is what we know and what we are doing and so forth. And I just feel like that allows us to communicate in a very different way with communities, with people, that cuts across, you know, divisive, polemic lines that are being drawn more and more and more. Everybody's trying to draw those lines, you know, and the Russians are helping us, of course, with Facebook, and that's, thank you very much. And but we want to, it's not so much the words we use or don't use so much is the conversation we have itself, you know, which is not about being right, as I said, and about, you know, And when you go to communities, you know, that have been deracinated, which is what we've done in the United States, is deracinate so many communities, and is really about possibility. You know, like, let's talk about possibility. And as I said, you know, we have to move from a world of probability, which is really what the conversation about, what probably is going to go wrong and happen if this continues. And you kind of feel like, oh, dang, you know, but instead we have to move to a conversation about what are the possibilities inherent in this, you know, and just expand that conversation in a way that is practical, hands-on, that is grounded in science and good economics, and then see what happens.
For me, it evokes the great Greek gardener Epicurus and his value of eudaimonia, right? Human flourishing, this aspiration that we can do things in a way that generates human flourishing while we do it. Let's have a great round of applause for a great gardener, Paul Hawken. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next week, Professor Leah Fernald's going to be here to talk about global issues in public health and the research scientist's agenda. And one last announcement, we've confirmed that Michael Pollan is going to join us for our last class on April 18th.
Wow. That's cool.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hi.